Hey, it worked. And keep in mind resources, okay? Last week we finished up with oligopoly and monopolistic competition. We kind of covered the market structures. This week and next week, we're gonna finish up on the wages. Why do you get paid what you get paid? Which is what I'm kind of leading my discussion with today. Why do you get paid what you get paid? And then we'll finish it up on May 4th, which will be the last week on healthcare. That's kind of the first where we'll finish up. The reason why we study this is a number of reasons, a couple of which are, keep in mind, resource prices are your income, okay? From the company's perspective, they're costs. From the individual's perspective, their income. Okay, and how we allocate resources is based upon prices. And it creates some policy issues such as things like minimum wages, price ceilings, things like that, that we'll probably end up talking about next week as opposed to this week. Now, the first thing to realize is that the demand for resources is what we call a derived demand. And by that, I mean, nobody in this room or nobody in class today has ever bought a ton of steel, okay? Yet we all have a need for a ton of steel. It's called a car, okay? It's called a car. So all the resources are, the reason why we have a demand for them is because we demand the good. We don't demand a ton of steel, but we demand what a ton of steel can do for us in the form of, in this case, a car. So the demand for a resource depends upon a couple of things. It depends upon how productive the resource is. And this is one of the important, this is the reason why you're all sitting here today. Okay. One of the things that a college education does for you is makes you more productive. A higher education level will make you more productive. And to the extent you're more productive, your employer can afford to pay you more money. Okay. And just a quick note, and I find this absolutely fascinating. I was talking to some nurses a couple of years ago now, and most RNs today, at some point, in order, depending upon where they're going to work, whatever, need a bachelor's degree. And what the evidence says, keep in mind, to become an RN, you have to pass an exam, a nationwide licensing exam, okay? What the evidence has found is that an RN with a bachelor's degree is, and I hate to use this word, but a better RN. They have better outcomes than an RN with just an associate's degree. Even though their training is exactly the same as far as nursing goes, and what didn't those bachelor's nurses have? Maybe they didn't have as much, history or what have you. That history class that maybe that nurse at Dabney, as opposed to a nurse that's working on their bachelor's degree, you go, well, what's a history class or an econ class perhaps have to do with being a nurse? And you can go, absolutely nothing. But what happens, what they found is that nurses with bachelor's degrees have more critical thinking skills, and the outcomes are better than an RN that just has an associate's degree. So one of the things that is how productive that resource is. And then the other item is the market value of the good it's producing. It does no good to be super productive if nobody wants it. Okay, if you can't sell the good, you could be super great at making something, but if nobody wants to buy it, you're gonna starve. Okay, and so you do need both of those items. Okay, you do need both of those items. Now, what we're going to worry about is something called the marginal revenue product. Okay, and in order to get the marginal revenue product, you need to know the marginal product and the product price. Now, the marginal product goes back, I don't know, probably about 6 chapters ago. Okay, when we talked about, remember my example, I think of a fast food place, what have you, how many units you can produce. Okay. And so what the marginal revenue product is it's the increase in total revenue from the use of each additional unit of an input. Okay. That marginal revenue product is the firm's demand for a resource. Okay. I used to, good Lord, back in the 90s, I was teaching a class in Wisconsin, and every day I would go in. I was teaching some econ classes and some accounting classes, and every day I'd go in, I'd go by the college president's office and talk to the secretary or the admin assistant, what have you. And she'd either give me or I'd give her one more example of an actor, an actress, a musician, a basketball star, an athlete, if you will. And it's like, how can they be worth $50 million? How can they possibly be worth $50 million? You know, who's worth $50 million a year? And I go, those basketball players are. And they go, how? And you need to just think about it. There's basically 80 games in a basketball season. There's really 82. I'm just using 80 because I like round numbers. Okay. Suppose an average basketball ticket goes for $40. Okay. That's $3,200. Okay. Now suppose they sell an extra 2,000 tickets per game. Okay. That particular player is worth at least $6.5 million more than the other players on the board, on the team. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago when LeBron James was playing up here in Cleveland, there were a number of students in class that for the weekend would come up to Cleveland to watch the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James play a game. And now you go, well, okay, 6.4 million. But now we got to add parking. Now we got to add concessions, hot dogs and beer and whatever. Okay. Now we got to add, you know, those are the items at the park, T-shirts and other items. Okay. All of a sudden, is that person worth 10 or 15 million more than the other average player? And the answer is yes. Okay. Why? Because of their marginal revenue product, that increase in total revenue that's going to come. How many more in baseball, perhaps? How many more season tickets are you going to sell by putting that superstar on your team? All of a sudden, when you boil it down that way, you know, I hate to say it, that preschool teacher that's fighting for $15 an hour, or that nurse that might be making, you know, 30 or $40 an hour. And it's like, man, is that preschool teacher or that nurse more valuable? I have a hard, you know, I know the value that basketball, baseball, what movie star, what have you is, and that's a big number. And is it always fair? And I think the last slide, either on this chapter or the next chapter, says, is it always fair? And the answer is no. But what you're getting paid is your marginal revenue product. And if you want to earn more, you got to find a way to increase your marginal revenue product, which in many of your cases, as you're in class today, whatever, is education. Now, to figure out the marginal revenue product, okay, we take the marginal product and multiply it by the output. How many are you going to sell? Okay. And to maximize profits, A firm should hire additional units of a resource as long as each successive unit adds more to total revenue than it adds to total cost. And that marginal revenue product is the firm's demand curve for labor. So let's take a look and see what's going to happen. Okay, one other item first. The marginal resource cost is how much of each additional unit of a resource a firm adds to the cost. And an employer's rule for hiring: firms will hire resources up to the point where the marginal revenue product equals the marginal resource cost. Okay. Now, a couple of things here. There is something called a wedge, and it occurs all the time in labor. And y'all know this, although you don't fully appreciate it. Suppose you get paid $10 an hour. Okay. And suppose that, well, Social Security tax is about 6%. I'm using 6% just as a round number. So you lose 60 cents that hour for Social Security. And then you lose something for an income tax at 10%. It's $1. Let's just go with that. Okay, so that's $1.60. So all of a sudden your take-home pay is $8.40 an hour. Okay, and you go, man, and it's always the learning curve on that first job. We all were there that first time. We get that first paycheck, we take a look and we go, what the heck? I was working, 30 hours or whatever it was. I was expecting a check for 300 and it's only 250. What's going on? Well, there's that 840. But then from the employer's perspective, they're paying you $10. They're matching that 60 cents. Okay, that 60 cents is matched by them, 6%. It's really like 6.4 or what have you. I'm just rounding. Okay. Plus, at a minimum, even if there's no benefits, what have you, there's probably some unemployment insurance or something else that might not be huge, but there's probably something more there. Bottom line is, from your employer's perspective, you're costing them $10.60, even though you're only seeing $8.40 in your paycheck. Okay, it's called a wedge. And when firms are looking at the cost, that's the number they're going to look at, that entire cost, even though you're only getting paid the $8.40. They're going to be looking there at that $10.60 and going, my God. So if you don't produce $10.60 worth of additional revenue, I'm not going to hire you. So firms are going to hire a resource up to the point where the wage equals the marginal resource cost. They're only going to hire you if you produce more than $10.60 per hour for them. That's kind of their break-even point. Questions so far? And the answer is why? And the answer I was always given in econ classes, what have you, is suppose not. Okay. Suppose you are costing your boss $10.60 and you're only producing $10 worth of revenue. Does it really make sense for them to hire you? You're producing $10 worth of revenue, you're costing them $10.60, and the answer is no. Now, if you're producing them $15 of revenue and you're only costing me $10.60, I'm going, heck yeah. Do you know any buddies that can come work? Okay. So what happens is we need these two, the marginal revenue product and the marginal resource cost, to be equal. Okay. Because if they're not equal, it's going to pay to either lay people off or to hire more workers, up until the point where they're equal. And where the marginal revenue product equals the marginal resource cost, that is the firm's maximizing use of inputs. Okay, that's where you kind of want to be, if you will. So let's take a look at what goes on here. Okay, and notice what happens here. If we have, and these first two columns, you've seen a variation of it before. Okay, now notice what happens. As I increase my number of employees in this case, their marginal product goes down. Now, if you'll recall from earlier in the semester, I had the marginal product go up for a while, reach maximum, and then come down. Could have it done that here? And the answer is yes. Would have it changed my results? And the answer is no. Okay. Now, this is perfect competition. The question is, how do we know? Because the product price is always $70. And so notice what the marginal revenue product is. The marginal revenue product over here is $350. So if we hire one user, they can produce 5 units. We can sell them at $70. That's $350. When we hire the second worker, they can only produce 4 additional units. That's their marginal revenue product. Times the $70 equals $280. Okay, and 3 times 70 is 210. Notice what happens to this marginal revenue product. It falls. Okay, and in this case falls rather precipitously, although not as precipitously as we'll see later on. So what we get is a marginal revenue product curve that is downward sloping. Okay, and it's the quantity of labor. The other way to look at this is the demand for labor. So the demand for labor curve is downward sloping. Okay. The demand for labor is downward sloping. Now, these first 3 columns are identical. This is an imperfect competition. How do we know that? Because in order to sell more units, you got to cut the price. Notice what happens to the marginal revenue product now. It goes from 450 to 50. Here it went from 350 to 70. So in essence, under imperfect competition, that demand curve is much steeper. In perfect competition, that demand curve is more elastic. In imperfect competition, it is more inelastic. Okay. Now keep in mind, most, as we just saw, most markets are imperfectly competitive. Okay. There's imperfect competition. Most of the markets are monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, not pure competition. So that demand curve, the demand for labor, is very steep. And I'll never forget, my dad was in a union years ago. And the union wanted to know if they were going to be willing to take a pay cut to keep more. It was during a recession, probably in the late 70s, probably in the 70s at some point. I was just a kid at home. Okay. Could have been the 80s, but, and the union said no. Okay. And the reason is, okay, they were looking at their demand curve as being very inelastic. And they go, if I cut my wage, which is up here, and I have a very inelastic demand curve, will I get a little bit more? And the answer is yes, but will I get a lot more? And the answer was no. So the companies went to them, whatever, and said, hey, will you be willing to cut your wage to have more people work? And the union said no. And the reason why they said no was because they were looking at the demand curve and they said, look, we're in imperfectly competitive markets. Okay. The demand for our services is relatively inelastic. the cost of an electrician in the grand scheme of things is a small part of the cost of a building or whatever. Is it going to lead to a lot more work? And the answer is no. So why do it? Now, keep in mind, for those people that didn't have a job, that was an issue. Okay. It's also the reason why, and we're going to talk about the two discussion boards probably next week. It's also the reason why, when we talk about a $15 minimum wage, we're down here at, I don't know, let's make it $8. Okay. The whole question is, how steep is that demand curve? If it's really steep, you're going to lose almost no jobs. If it's really elastic or very flat, you're going to lose a ton. Okay. And part of it is also dependent upon where you're located. If you're in Allegheny County, okay, you may be a lot more impacted by a $15 minimum wage than somebody in Alexandria. Okay. And the reason is because most of those wages may already be up there. Okay. It may not have a huge impact. So some of the impacts that we run into here is the marginal revenue product is more elastic in perfect competition. It's flatter. So an imperfectly competitive producer is less responsive to a wage cut than under pure competition. So the question, and keep in mind, I've got here a wage cut. It could just as easily be a wage increase. It doesn't have to be a wage cut, it could be a wage increase. Okay. And keep in mind, most markets are imperfectly competitive. Okay. So they're going to be less responsive to a wage cut or a wage increase than under pure competition. So what's going to shift the demand of a resource? Okay, this is the determinant. These are the ones, go back to chapter 3, that are going to cause that demand curve to get up and move, either an increase or a decrease. A change in the product demand. Okay, if there's a change in the demand for a product, there's going to be a change in the demand for the resources that go into the production of that product. Productivity changes matter. Okay. And it may lead to things like more capital, technology changes, things like that. Labor quality matters. One of the reasons why the governor, the chancellor, the president always wants individuals to go to college, become more educated, even if it's becoming a plumber or an electrician or what have you, is because that improves labor quality. And when labor quality goes up, your productivity goes up. If your productivity goes up, I can pay you more. I'm going to skip back here just for a minute, just to show you. Nope, that's a good one. If your productivity goes up, if instead of, let's use this one, instead of producing 4 units, you produce 5 because you're more productive. I can now afford to pay you $400 instead of $320. So your productivity matters. Okay, productivity matters. Which is why many of you are here in school. Okay, prices of other resources matter. Okay, and the trade-off we're going to typically use is capital versus labor. Okay, but the prices of other resources matter. And before I go into that, let me just kind of, the fear of let's use a $15 minimum wage. Okay, and you're starting to see this already, and it's not even the minimum wage that's causing it, it's COVID. Okay, you see a lot of places where they want you to order online. Okay, and the argument is, well, then you don't have to come into the restaurant, and I'm thinking like a McDonald's, what have you, and you don't have to talk to somebody And because of that, there's less chance for you to spread the virus, what have you. So I've gone into a McDonald's that was open, and rather than walking up to the counter, they go, use the kiosk. Okay. Well, keep in mind, okay, that's a trade-off between capital and labor. Okay. And what they're doing is, instead of having somebody there to take my order, okay, they're using capital, that computer screen, that kiosk, what have you, and they're swapping capital for labor. And so we have to remember that that swap can always occur. And one of the fears, and I'm not sure how it's found, how well it's founded, I mean, there's a lot of disagreements on this, is if they go to a $15 minimum wage, how many jobs will we lose by them replacing capital with labor? Okay. And the best example I have is at Kroger. Okay. And you're finding this at more grocery stores around the country. I don't know if they have it in Clifton yet. Do they have the self checkout where you can scan the items as you put them in your buggy?
Yes.
Okay. But they had them first in Roanoke, and I used them all the time in Roanoke and what have you. But keep in mind, from their perspective, okay, that's a simple item, okay, that allows them then to not pay that person to check you out, okay, but to pay that person to grab groceries for those that are afraid to come into the store, or perhaps to stock the shelves and keep them better stocked, okay, or to keep the aisles cleaner, or perhaps just to save money and offer lower prices, what have you, okay? So that's the reason they're doing it, and all companies have opportunities to do some of those things. Now, some more than others, okay? You go for a massage. I have read a report this week about a machine that does it. I just can't imagine it does it quite as well as a human, but okay. But there are a lot of things that you can't necessarily use a machine for, okay? There's also a lot that you can. And so what happens is now we have to figure out how substitutable, if you will, capital and labor are. And there are two effects. There's a substitution effect, capital for labor, and there's an output effect. Costs fall, it's more profitable, so you produce more. And let me give you kind of a quick story that illustrates the point. Back when I was in your spot in the 80s, okay, there was a concern that you would no longer need accountants. At the time, computer technology was just getting going. It wasn't Excel spreadsheets at the time. It was Lotus 1-2-3. Okay. For those of you a little older, you may remember that. Okay. And they're going, what are you going to need an accountant for? Okay. And the fact of the matter is, we have more accountants today that make more money and what have you. The thing we don't need today are what we call bookkeepers. I don't know if it's got 1K or 2. I think 1, but I'm not sure. We don't need bookkeepers. And in fact, if you look at the college curriculum at Dabney over the last 25 to 30 years, 25, 30 years ago, we had a class in bookkeeping. We don't have a class in bookkeeping anymore. Bookkeeping is gone. But what we need are accountants. We need people that can use the information, analyze it, interpret it, tell me what it means, tell me what to do about it. I don't need somebody to put it together. I can hit a button and it'll sum the entire column. And so then what happens is we need to worry about these two effects. The substitution effect, where we substitute capital for labor. That's the example perhaps in McDonald's. where they are, saying, hey, don't order it from the person, go to the kiosk. Okay. Or don't have the person check you out. Basically, you're checking yourself out at Kroger. Okay. And in that case, you'd use less labor perhaps and more capital. But there's also this output effect. One is your costs fall. Why? Because you have people checking themselves out at Kroger, just to use that as an example. So now I'm more profitable. So now that I'm more profitable, perhaps I cut costs, or pardon me, I cut my prices, and more people come to my store. And now I need more people to stock shelves. So the question that comes up is, which effect is bigger? Okay, what effect is bigger? And if the substitution effect is bigger than the output effect, we find that labor falls. If the output effect is greater than the substitution effect, we find labor goes up, which is the reason why when you read in the paper, read on Yahoo, read on, wherever else, oh, we've just been, this new technology came along and they laid off a bunch of people. Okay, that's telling me that the substitution effect was bigger than the output effect. But there are also plenty of other firms that you'll see that'll make the same announcement. Oh, we've got this new machinery, this new capital. It's great. We're going to be hiring more people. You go, well, how are they going to hire more people? What they're telling you then is that the output effect is bigger than the substitution effect. So when you read those press releases or reports or whatever, they're telling you which effect is bigger, even though, only they probably know. But that's what's going on. So what's going on here kind of more in layman terms is assume that labor and capital are complements. They go together, okay, 1-to-1. If the price of capital falls, production costs fall, it's more profitable to produce, they can hire more capital and labor. And that may happen in industry one. Okay. But there might be another industry where the price of capital goes down, production costs fall, it's more profitable, and they don't hire more capital. Why? Because there's not a demand for their product. But it goes to explain why computer prices fall, and one company will hire more labor. Why? Because they're more profitable to produce and they can produce more. And in the second, the computer prices fall, but they hire fewer workers. Why? Because of the difference between the substitution effect and the output effect. In this case, they're substituting computers for labor, and the substitution effect is ruling. Here, the output effect is ruling. Questions? Must have 2 Ks. Since the 70s, the share of occupations involving routine tasks that could be displaced by computers has declined. We don't need bookkeepers anymore. Okay? Don't need as many admin assistants. In fact, I was talking to a local employer once, specifically about admin assistants, and they go, we used to have, 7 or 11, and now we're down to 1. And I go, well, what happens when you host a meeting and execs come in from all over the country? We tell the manager to make his own plans for bringing in lunch, what have you. Okay. And they've gotten rid of them. Okay. So what's happening is computers have replaced a lot of those things. Back in my first job, I typed no letters. I picked up a phone, I dictated a letter into the phone, and somebody from the typing pool would actually type the letter and bring it to me. That's the way things were done in the 80s, folks. Today, I don't think at even the largest company, they're going to have typing departments and what have you anymore. They're going to tell that person to type their own, even on campus, okay? And you kind of have to go over the last, let's say, 25 years. The jobs have changed rather tremendously, okay? We used to have in each department people that would type up exams, department secretaries, admin assistants, and they would type up things such as exams, what have you. We have none of those folks anymore. Mr. Sass wants an exam typed up to hand you a sheet of paper for exam. He's got to type it up himself. Okay. Conversely, the share of occupations involving non-routine, i.e., you need education, architecture, accounting, whatever, in which computers serve as complements but not substitutes, has been increasing. Okay. And any job that's routine, we're going to talk about the discussion boards next week. Any job that's routine is a risk. Okay, is a risk of going away. They're working on the technology, and I'm not sure they've even quite perfected it yet, where when you walk into Kroger, you'd grab a cart, you would scan the cart in some way, and it'd kind of electrify the cart. And then every time you put something in the cart, it really works the same as the self-checkout with the hand, but it's a little bit more user-friendly, if you will. You picked an item off the shelf and put it in the cart, it automatically added to your bill. And in fact, they'd have a computer screen attached to the handle, which would give you a running total of what's in your cart. So you could bring your own bags and load your groceries right as you go, and it'd be keeping you a total as you go through. And then the technology would also allow you to pick the item out, put it back on the shelf, and then take it off your chart, take it off your bill. And the theory is then they'd have kind of like at Sam's Club, whatever, they'd have one person sitting at the door, and once you went under some sort of a reader or what have you, it would say, Mr. Sass is checking out, and it would check me out, and then I'd walk by that one person like at Sam's at the door, and they'd hand me my receipt and say, here you go, Mr. Sass, have a great day. We'd get rid of 6, 7, 8 checkout folks, be down to 1. Okay? Those are routine jobs. You probably need at least one for theft and other purposes. But do you need 7 or 8 lines open or what have you? The answer is no. And keep in mind, from a customer's perspective, it means I don't have to wait in line. One of the huge benefits of using that thing is I don't have to wait in line. I've walked a couple of times, and man, people are like pissed at me. Because I walk up to one of the self-checkout ones. There's one here, there's one in Ohio. You don't even have to stand in line. You just walk up to a separate spot. You scan your item and you walk out, and people are like pissed. Some generalizations. If the marginal product of labor falls slowly as it's added to a fixed amount of capital, the marginal revenue product will decline slowly and be elastic. So it's going to be kind of flat. The demand curve is going to be kind of flat. Okay. Some other things that play a role. Ease of resource substitutability. Okay. In the short run, it is very difficult to substitute capital for labor. Okay. In the long run, it's much easier. So the short run, the demand curve is going to be more inelastic, and in the long run, it's going to be more elastic. Elasticity of the product demand. If the price goes up, do people still buy it or not? And the labor cost to total cost ratio. Think about it. Suppose the cost is 100% labor. And labor prices go up by 10%. If the cost is 100% labor, I have to raise my price to 110. If it's $100, I have to take it up to 110 bucks. If it's $100 still and the cost of labor is only 10%, so it's only 10 bucks, it only goes up to 11, I only have to raise my price to 101. And what does this have to do with, haircuts? The price of haircuts have gone up rather substantially. Why? Because the price of the haircut is almost 100% labor. So if the labor price goes up by 10%, they got to raise their prices by like 10%. Education. And if you think about it, and I could put the, haircuts are one, education is another. Okay. We often complain about how expensive higher education has gotten. Okay. Why has it gotten so expensive? Almost all our costs are labor, folks. So as labor becomes more expensive, it's almost 1-to-1. Healthcare is another one. Drug prices are another item. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of this last week at class when we talk healthcare. Healthcare is another one. Most of the cost is labor. The doctors, the nurses, what have you. When those costs go up, it has a huge impact on the price of the item. How do firms determine how to put together capital and labor? Okay. And what we have to remember is consumer utility maximizing rule. Okay. Remember the consumer utility maximizing rule? You take the marginal utility of A over the price of A, and it had to equal the marginal utility of B over the price of B. And it had to equal the marginal utility of C over the price of C. The same thing applies to businesses. But they're going to put the marginal product of labor over the price of labor. And they're going to say that has to equal the marginal product of capital over the price of capital. And keep in mind, I may have a bunch of different capital items here. And then in theory, we can take the marginal product of land divided by the price of land. And I could use all four of my resources. We're going to just limit it to labor and capital just to make it easy, keep it simple. And so let's assume the prices are $1. The marginal product of labor is 10. The marginal product of capital is 5. Notice what I have. I have 10 over 1, which is greater than 5 over 1. So what does that mean I should do? Hire more labor. Okay, or if not hire more, the next unit that I hire should be labor. Why? Because labor is going to provide me $10 a product and only cost me $1. Capital is going to be 5 and only cost me $1. But because this ratio 10-to-1 is greater than 5-1, I should hire more labor. So what we end up doing is employing the unit of resource up to the point where the price equals the marginal revenue product. And notice in this case, I want them both to equal 1. Okay, I want them both to equal 1. So assume the price of labor is $5, the marginal product of labor is 15, the price of capital is 3, and the marginal revenue product of capital is 9. I have 15 over 5 and 9 over 3. Both of those equal 3, but they don't equal 1. What that means is I need to produce more. Why do I need to produce more? Look, if I hire a unit of labor, they produce $15 worth of revenue. They only cost me $5. If I can get 15 bucks of revenue, it only costs me $5. Man, give me more, baby. Capital, marginal revenue product of capital is 9. The price of capital is 3. I only have to pay them $3, but it provides $9 worth of revenue. Give me more, baby. What this all means is that labor is paid a wage equal to the marginal contribution that it makes to a firm's revenue. What it means is LeBron James is worth it. Okay. It means that, you know, whatever amount of money Blake Shelton or whatever other artist you want to put in there makes, they're worth it. Questions? Notice I use my old example, good old Jay Leno. The huge criticism of this is it's unfair. Okay. Leads to inequality. Why? Intelligence, wealth, skills are not equally distributed. God, wouldn't we all like to be like LeBron James, score some baskets, play basketball, play a game, and get paid millions of dollars? Needless to say, I don't have that skill. And I can probably pretty safely say none of you do either. Because if we did, we'd be doing it. Questions? I am going to stop here. Let me see if I can do it. Yep. What I am going to do for next week is I am going to, and I send you, hopefully on one sheet of paper like this, slides 23 and 24. I will email them to you later today. And then for next week, what we're going to do is, it's kind of like I'm being a nice guy. I almost hate to admit this. There are going to be, no learn smarts, no assignments due. We'll have some due for we'll be doing some for the next week. And I'll send you instructions for this. I want you to take the handout that I'm going to send you, email you. And I want to know, and I want to know the most most productive way to make 50 units of output. And I'll give you these instructions in the email. And then that'll be part one. And then part two is that the most profitable? So really next week, and we'll start class by talking about that and seeing how well you did. And then we'll get into the next chapter. So I really haven't finished the chapter on this costs yet, whatever. So I want to do least cost and most profitable. So I'm going to send you a handout with some things to look at for next week so we can kind of see how these numbers work, those formulas that I just talked about. Questions?
Is this going to be like a Canvas project or a discussion board?
It will be, you'll love this. It'll be neither. It'll be bring it to class and see how you did.
Oh, okay. So it's not like something to turn in for a grade.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?